I want to read you a story that takes us back to 1928. In 1928, the Sudan Interior Mission sent the first missionaries to the Wallamo, Wallamo, tribe of Ethiopia. They faced a difficult task, for the Wallamos were Satan worshippers. On the first day of the year, the tribe performed a ceremony resembling the Old Testament Passover that was in reality a sacrifice to the devil. A bull was sacrificed, its blood was smeared on the doorsteps of each house, and a drop of blood was placed on each family member. The ceremony ended with the head of the household on his knees, praying to Satan. Then everyone ate the raw meat. Wealthy Wallamos were slave owners. If a slave owner decided his slaves had had enough children, he would have all further babies born to them and buried alive. This is the environment these missionaries went into. Satan worshippers, murderers, killing their own children if the population was more than it was allowed. By 1930, the Ethiopian government was attempting to stop the slavery and the killing of the babies among the Wallamos. In 1935, Emperor Haile Selassie was in the process of trying to modernize his nation when Italian troops under Mussolini invaded. Italian troops had attacked once before in 1896. But that time, Ethiopia had overpowered them. That humiliating defeat marked the first time in history that an African nation had defeated a European invader. Now Mussolini was determined to avenge the defeat. This time the Ethiopians were no match for the well-equipped Italian army. They fought courageously, but in May 1936, the capital fell. The Italian army advanced into the tribal areas, demanding that the missionaries leave. On April 16, 1937, a day before the missionaries to the Wallamo left, they shared the Lord's Supper with the believers. When the missionaries had first arrived, there was no believers in the tribe. Now, 9 years later, there were 48. 48. That's it. 9 years, 48 believers. That's a little bit over 5 believers a year. And it doesn't say missionary. It's plural. It's missionaries. The next day, Italian army trucks took the 26 missionaries. It's a lot of missionaries. So there must have been a lot of Wallamos. And as you'll see, there was in a few minutes. The next day, Italian army's trucks took the 26 missionaries and their children to the capital for evacuation. As the trucks pulled away, the missionaries wondered if they would ever be able to return and what they would find if they did. With the missionaries gone, the Italians tried to stamp out the fledgling church. Many church leaders were given 100 lashes, and one was given 400. After the lashings, they could not lie on their backs for months, and 3 died. Toro, a leader in the Wallamo church, was able to stay in hiding for 6 months before he was finally captured. He was given 40 lashes. Then an Italian officer wearing hobnail boots jumped up and down on his chest, nearly crushing his ribcage. Later, as he lay immobile in his prison cell, he saw a vision of Jesus, who said to him, "Do not be afraid, you are my child." After a slow recovery, Toro was released from prison, only to be arrested again when he resumed preaching. This time, he and the other church leaders were taken to the marketplace, stripped naked, and even given more than 100 lashes. Back in jail, Toro's Italian captors taunted him, saying, quote, "Where is your God? Who can deliver you from us? You'll never get out of here alive." End of quote. Hardly able to speak, Toro whispered that God could deliver him. Quote, "If he chooses, and if not, he has promised to take me to heaven to be with him there." End of quote. Later, Toro and his fellow believers were praying when a fierce thunderstorm descended upon the prison. The gale-force winds literally blew the roof off. Torrents of water separated the mud walls from the foundation. Most of the non-Christian prisoners escaped. The frightened jailers were convinced the storm had come in answer to the prisoners' prayers. Quote, "Ask your God to withhold his anger," end of quote, they begged Toro. Quote, "And we will release you," end of quote. They kept their word and released him. It's not a very long story. But here is the final paragraph in this story. Finally, on July 4th, 1943, July 4th, 1943, the missionaries were able to return to Wallamo. What do you think they found? Remember, when they left, there was only 48 believers. We know at least 3 died. I'm sure others died too in the time period they were gone, which was about, 6 years, 7 years, 6 years? Only 48 believers when the 26 missionaries left. Now, on July 4th, 1943, the missionaries are able to return. What do you think they found? During the 6 years they were gone, the 48 believers had multiplied. It multiplied to 18,000. 18,000. The 26 missionaries spent years and all he got is 48 converts. Probably it had something to do with how these people that were preaching the word survived that prison episode. And the word got out. The word got out. And they got out. And the prison guard kept their word, and they let him out. That story got around. These people, whatever they're preaching, their God held back his anger. God used all kinds of different ways to get people's attention. I could spend the rest of my life just reading you stories how he does that. Some amazing stories. This is a short story, but it's also amazing. 48 turned into 18,000 believers. Why? Because God gave the increase. God gave the increase. What a July 4th, 1943 celebration that was. True independence. Something that goes beyond the here and now in the flesh. There's nothing like spiritual independence. Knowing what you've been delivered from. It doesn't mean the war is over. The spiritual war has just begun for anyone that's born from above. Even though the victory is won as far as your salvation, you don't have happy campers in the unseen spiritual war that's going on because of the result of seeing you and many others being saved by grace, and now also a warrior of Jesus Christ. Another person as an ambassador to share and support, to recruit others into the fold. Go to Matthew 13. Matthew 13, starting from the beginning of the chapter, we read about the parable of the sower. And then the reason for the parable and the parable of the sower is explained. Then you get into the wheat and tares, and you get to the mustard seed. And then you get to the leaven in verse 33. And then you get the parables explained, the remainder of the chapter, and then you get the buried treasure and so forth. But in verse 31 and verse 32, let's just read it together. It reads, "Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like to a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all seeds. But when it is grown, it is the greatest among herbs, and becometh a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in the branches thereof." This parable reveals the outward growth of the church, of Christianity. And if you continue in verse 33, it goes on to explain what eventually will become the internal condition of the church, especially these last days churches. The church has not converted the world with the message of the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. But it has a tremendous influence on the world. Christianity is still no matter what part of Christianity, whether it's Protestant or Catholic, whatever, it's still the largest group of, let's just call it religious believers on this planet. Followed by Islam and then Hinduism. Now, my guess, Islam will overtake Christianity the closer we get to the final seconds of these last days. And it's almost neck and neck now, as far as numbers goes, according to people that keep these kind of statistics. But this mustard seed parable is outward growth of Christianity. Why? Because, like I said, God gives the increase. He just needs faithful laborers to get the message out there, to go plant the seeds. Like I said, it reveals the outward growth of this church. In our case, the organized church in 2023. And the problem is it's become so mixed in with so many other things that shouldn't be a part of the church. But that was even prophesied, if you think about it. What would happen in these very last of the last days, even prior to that. It has a mix of good and bad. We should be the salt, if you really think about it, not the mustard seed, but the salt of this world, planting the mustard seed. You can say that could be the gospel if you want to. There's all kinds of different interpretations of these verses. If you look for an example, which indeed in verse 32, which indeed is the least of all these seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest among herbs, and becometh a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in the branches thereof. Now, you would think that'd be a good thing, wouldn't you? But this is just before the leaven in verse 33 verse. And it's after all the different examples of the parable of the sower. What does bird signify there? Well, you go back to the parable of the sower. Let's see if I can find it real quick. In verse 4 in chapter 13. And when he sowed some seeds by the wayside, here we got seeds again. It doesn't say what kind of seeds, but just seeds here. By the wayside, and the fowls came and devoured them up. And the fowls came. Who are the fowls in this particular verse? The enemy. The enemy, the unseen enemy, using even seen enemies to destroy what has been planted, or what has just been thrown by the wayside, with the hopes of being planted, with the hopes that it would take. But probably it didn't take, because it's by the wayside, and it gave the opportunity for the enemy to come in and swoop up, in this case, the gospel message, and it didn't take. Well, fowls here, is the Greek word for fowls is the same Greek word we find in verse 32. When indeed is the least of all these seeds, but when it's grown, it is the greatest among herbs, and becometh a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in the branches thereof. Birds in context hasn't changed. It's the same Greek word, whether in verse 4 or in verse 32. Yes, once again, the mustard seed's planted, it grows. And Christianity grew into the largest religious-based belief in the world. I'm not saying all the different sects of Christianity are anywhere near what God intended, but still, at least in name only, it's the largest religion in the world. Like I said, rapidly being challenged by Islam. And I believe eventually Islam overtake Christianity as the largest religion in the world. But why? Why that has to happen? Because, once again, the fowls, the birds of the air, the evil, dirty birds come in and pollute the gospel. Bring in another gospel. In the case of the Wallamo, that 48 turned into, what was it, 18,000? And they didn't even have any missionaries. The seed was planted. It took. Of course, it probably took also something that got their attention. And like I said, God has His own plans. And He knows what He's doing. And He's going to get your attention if He wants you to be part of the fold. I believe He wants everybody to be part of the fold, but people still have a choice whether they want to respond to it. Well, 18,000 respond. Now, I've been trying to do follow-ups on whatever happened to the Wallamo. as far as their religious beliefs and where it went with that. But I could see what happened to the Christian faith and how polluted it's become. How obvious it is another gospel. It's not the gospel of amazing grace. It's become the gospel of do's and don'ts, because those fowls, those birds are ready to pounce on those branches. And branches, if you want to go to John 15, which we did many times, who are the branches? Us. Who's the vine? Jesus in this case. And we're the branches. The fowls come to destroy. And any branches that are not fruitful in John 15, what happens to them? They get burned up. They get burned up. God's always pruning, believe it or not. It may not seem like that sometimes, but He's always pruning away. He's taking away what's useless, and eventually He's going to do that in a grand way when He returns. When every knee bows to Him, the King of Kings. But I thought this was kind of an encouraging story for me when I read it. How the Wallamo, sometimes I sit here and throughout the week and months and years, almost 18 now, wonder if it's taking. A lot's being put out over the course of this 18 years. A lot's being spent to get the message to people so they hear the good news. I don't care about numbers, so to speak, but I want to reach the numbers. At least give them the opportunity to hear the word rightly divided, to hear what a change of mind truly means. Not to try to keep avoiding Christianity because they're afraid of the do list and the don't list. They're afraid that they can't live up to it because they can't keep the commandments. They can't keep the rules. They can't keep the regulations. They know they're always going to fall short, so they're always going to feel guilty and beaten down. I don't do it for those reasons. I do it to reach people, to give them what it really is. We call it the good news, but I like to call it the great news, because there's nothing greater than that. There's no more freedom in this gospel. In fact, you can't find any more freedom than in this gospel. It's the ultimate freedom. We're not the part of the walking dead any longer. We're alive, vibrant, ambassadors of Jesus Christ, filled with the Spirit of God, called for a reason, chosen for a purpose. And this midway through the year, I want us to remember that. I want us to remember why we were chosen and called. Some Christians, all they like to do is keep to themselves. I know not everybody's going to be a preacher, but you can participate in many different ways. I know people that all they do is keep their face in the book, trying to learn more and more about God's Word, and they don't even share it with their family. But yet they pray for their family to get saved. Well, how do you think that's going to happen? Faith comes by hearing, and hearing the Word of God. There's not a new formula or plan how this happens, folks. It takes participation in all different types and ways. Not everybody's going to be comfortable to do what I do and some of you do. That's okay. You might be more comfortable just sharing with your family. Then do that. And some of you that don't have family that needs to be saved, or you're just all alone, then participate and help us getting this out to as many as we can.